Crossfire has always been something that has never ceased to amaze me, but earlier revisions of it were plagued by terrible issues including poor refresh rates or resolution problems. This was of course up until ATI released the revolutionary X1950XTX Crossfire edition. Originally coming out in mid-2006 at a very compelling £399 or $449 launch price, this card was released along the standard X1950XTX model, and shares the exact same specifications including a 650MHz core clock, 512MB of blazing fast GDDR4 VRAM clocked in at 1000MHz, 16 pipelines and 48 pixel shaders are also included on board. This is all based on the RV580 Plus architecture, which is in turn on the 90nm lithography. Today the card cost me around £12, but that's a very good price as I've seen them selling for upwards of £50 usually, so don't expect to get this card cheap. But you may be thinking, what's the difference between this card and the other one? Well, what makes this card so special is if you take a look in the back, you see this rather weird set of connectors, which is the original way to connect these cards, as Crossfire before this had been very saturated on the PCI Express ports and resulted in the poor experience I mentioned in the introduction. So with the use of these external connectors, it gave ATI a massive amount of bandwidth to play with, as 3 cards could actually be used without even saturating what this connection had to offer. It also has an extra 5 image compositing chips to combine the output of both of the cards. Before we go all in depth about this, we need to take a look about what Crossfire was before this card was actually introduced. It was enabled on the X800 series of cards, where the X850 would be limited to a maximum of 1600 by 1200, which doesn't sound that bad. But do remember that people were using CRTs at the time and it was limited to 60Hz. Now this would cause flickering, which was known to cause eye strain, and having to drop down the resolution to increase the refresh rate would kinda make the incentive worthless, as the only real reason to have Crossfire was to play at this resolution with high settings, and you could play at these low settings with high enough refresh rates with just one card, so it just didn't make sense to do it, as the costs outweighed the benefits. This was up until the introduction of the card that you see before you, which allowed for double the bandwidth of the connection on these cards and was way better than previous attempts. Now Crossfire at this point allowed for a range of features, such as allowing both cards to render each of the images for an enhanced frame rate. AFR, the first of these, was the same as Nvidia's SLI, but this caused massive driver overhead as one card had to render the even frames while the other one had to render the odd frames. Scissor, which is similar, but instead each frame is rendered in 2 halves so that both the GPUs can share the number of triangles on screen and present a final rendered frame. This was possible either with both a horizontal or vertical axes and was a great hit with gamers in the games that it did support, as it can adjust to split the image to be uneven if one part got more complicated than the next, so that no slowdown would be perceived by the end user. And finally you have Super Tile, which allowed you to split each frame into 32 by 32 tiles, and then the GPUs would be assigned to certain tiles and then reassemble them after each graphics card had rendered the tiles. This was incredibly popular, but mainly due to it being the default rendering option, but it did work fairly well. But say your game didn't actually support Crossfire. Now then you can use Super AA, which allowed for up to 14 times anti-aliasing with little to no performance hit. But not only is it possible and known to work incredibly well with anti-stereoscopic filtering, ATI claimed that you could double the point of view of the cards for 10 times and 14 times anti-aliasing to work with anti-stereoscopic filtering, doubling its effect up to 32 times. Which sounds like a lot of tech jargon, but actually it did improve the image quality for a lot of ATI cards of the time. Now unfortunately I still need to get a hold of 2 of these cards today, so we'll be taking a look at the singular performance of one of these cards before returning to it very soon as I can track down another one and a cable for it. So see this as sort of a benchmark for improvement, testing ATI's rare Crossfire card 11 years after its release to see if it can get me through some of my day-to-day games that I like to play. Up first we have CSGO, which is in the low settings in the 720p resolution, which I wasn't expecting to work as well as it did. But on average we saw 35 FPS with minimums down to 28 FPS. Now I know that for competitive gaming this isn't ideal, but you could drop down the LOD details or even the resolution for a tad more FPS. However, at a push, I found it was playable and I was able to enjoy a good few matches with the card. Up next we probably have the least optimised game of the GTA series, which ran at a 29 FPS average and dipped down to 23 FPS when there was a lot of explosions and particle effects in game. This is around the same FPS as the game ran out on the Xbox 360, which was already much higher than the PS3 port, which was pretty awful from what I've been told, so it certainly isn't bad, and you could always drop a few of the settings right down if you wanted to average something a tad higher. As soon as you go on to anything older than this though, you'll see performance way better than what you'd actually expect. Half-Life 2 running with full HDR enabled with a 45 FPS average showed this amazingly, and it only ever dipped down below 30 FPS once when there was a lot going on. Now you've got to remember this is full HD, which even the Xbox 360 or the PS3 weren't doing with their port of the game. Skyrim, another game also released 5 years after the cards originally came out, was playable with a 36 FPS average on the low preset in 720p, really just giving way to how much potential the card has on its own. It could stutter a tad in towns or cities, only hitting down to 24 FPS when there was a lot going on, but for the most part the gameplay from the card was fine. Finally, rounding off with another game from around the time of this card, we have Halo 2 with high settings selected, all in the 720p resolution. Now this game isn't the most optimized, but it looks great when running in the HD resolutions, especially with that 40 FPS average, with it only ever dimming down to 27 FPS when a lot of particle effects were going on. Definitely an experience I'd be happy with. So is a single card worth it? Well, if you only want to play DirectX 9 titles, it is one of the most powerful DirectX 9 only cards on the market, especially with that quite and large cooler that it comes with that allowed for some truly large overclocks back in the day, which unfortunately I didn't get to mess with. Now, am I excited about getting another one? Well, I do really want to see what the performance of two of these cards can offer, especially the raving reviews that Crossfire did get after this card was released, so I'll look forward and try and get hold of that card for you guys. Thank you very much for watching this video. Good night! So I tried something a little bit different with this video, and if you enjoyed it, please do comment down below. And if you'd like to support the channel, don't forget we have a Patreon, and you can always like and subscribe for more content just like this.